Hey guys, it's Jane. I'm here today for another chapter of my bookish life. Now this is going to be quite the roller coaster ride, so I hope you'll forgive me. I especially want to apologise to any of my new subscribers. There have actually been a little flurry of new subscribers lately, which is a little bit exciting. So if you're new, hello, welcome. I am still experimenting with this format, and basically the idea is for me to just come and talk about something that I've been thinking about lately, usually related to or sparked by books that I've been reading. So this week I'm going to be talking about narrative disorder, which is this concept Malka uses in her Centennial cycle books. So the first one is Infomocracy, which was a jolly good read. I read it earlier in the year. The second one is called Null States. I read it just this week. It's also a jolly good read. Most of the books are actually about democracy, bureaucracy, politics, and yeah, the nuances about how people relate to their government, basically. The world that she's created is in the near future. Nation states have largely, though not entirely, disappeared. Most of the world is now governed not by nation states but by centennials, which is the system of micro-democracy, groups of 10,000 people, so quite small groupings, or is it 100,000? Anyway, small groupings of people each elect their own government. Now, often, governments will be part of networks of allied centennial governments, but there are some that are just single centennials. And the stories are about the people who are working on maintaining this system or supporting this system, and also some people who are trying to undermine the system, and some drama around that. So they're really good reads, quite different to most science fiction that I've read. Yeah, very enjoyable. This week, not only did I read Null States, book 2, I also read an essay that Malka wrote about her concept of narrative disorder. One of the characters who appears in both books, Mishima, has been diagnosed at a very young age. She was in primary school with this thing called narrative disorder, which is a kind of recognised psychiatric condition in the world of the story. In the essay that Older wrote, she talks about the fact that this isn't just a fictional flight of fancy. As far as she's concerned, narrative disorder is a real thing, and she fully expects that it will be considered as such in the not too distant future. She says it's not a new condition. That's what Don Quixote is all about, read from one sort of way. In her essay, she claims that we are living in a golden age of narrative disorder. The character in the story who has been diagnosed with it, she's one of our point of view characters, and you can see within her, she walks a tightrope between embracing and rejecting what she's being told by her narrative disorder. It's an open question as far as she's concerned whether it's a strength or a weakness. It is in large part both. So what is this narrative disorder? In the essay, Older describes it as being diagnosable through two particular dimensions. Well, the first is narrative addiction. And when she was talking about this, of course, I felt incredibly called out because for somebody who reads stories at the rate that I do, it's clear that I am certainly somewhere on the chopping block for this kind of diagnosis. The other side of it is narrative perception. So it becomes a disorder, i.e. something which makes life more difficult to live, to manage, because the subjects of narrative disorder start seeing the kinds of tropes and narrative arcs that you find in fiction. They start perceiving it in the events of the real world. I'm just going to read you a little excerpt from this essay. I found this fascinating to think about. When non-fiction starts to take on those arcs too, then we start to see it in real life. She's talking in the first person because she considers herself to be somebody with this disorder as well. Some of us are more sensitive to this than others, probably because we're the ones with the worst addictions. We expect drama, and we expect it to crescendo and diminish in one of the familiar rhythms we're used to. We want resolution, and we believe the events will make sense if we can just uncover the intrigue behind them. That's such an interesting thought, and there's so many presuppositions there. I mean, what she's asserting is that there is no intrigue behind the events. The problem is that we see these connections where there are no connections. But what if there actually are connections? This is the question. What if we perceive the world as story-shaped because the world actually is story-shaped? This is, of course, one of the big metaphysical questions of life, and I found it really compelling and complicated to think about it this week. For those of you who don't know, this week is Holy Week, which is the most narratively dense week of the Christian calendar. So Holy Week stretches from Palm Sunday, which was last Sunday, through to Resurrection Sunday, next Sunday. And there is such a richness and depth of narrative detail in Scripture about the events that we recall and remember of this week, between Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, through the Last Supper and his betrayal, to the crucifixion and then the resurrection. This is this incredibly narratively dense week. And it's not just that the story is detailed, it's that part of the Christian celebration of this is to actually be a remembrance of this, which is not just intellectually not forgetting, it's to imaginatively recreate the events and to position yourself in the events as if you were there. This is actually what Jesus tells his disciples at the Last Supper. They should do these things, the bread and the wine type things in particular, in that instance, they should do these things in remembrance. It's so meta, the idea that somebody is telling you to remember this in a particular way, to recreate this situation and celebrate it again and again before the kicker has actually happened, before the action has happened, which demonstrates that this foreshadowing is actually significant. That's amazing. And, you know, lots of people might think that it's far-fetched and it's an editorial narrative inclusion. However, I think it's perfectly reasonable to think that Jesus actually said this, given that the meal that they were having at the time was itself a remembrance meal. It was a Passover meal, and Passover is yet another event where, before the events are actually happened, the Lord tells Moses how it is going to be commemorated later, not just what they are to do on this particular night where they have this Passover meal and put the blood on the lintels so that the angel of death will pass over them, but that this will be an annual remembrance. And all of this stuff is laid out before the events. It says that there is actually an intrigue behind these events, that the world we perceive as story shaped is at least at some level story shaped, because there is a storyteller telling a story. Okay, I have spent a couple of days working through these ideas, and I've never been able to get them to come out quite with the kind of compelling clarity that you really want to communicate this sort of idea. But I hope that you haven't been too lost with my ramblings. I'm going to stop there. I hope that you're all well, very well. My kids are finishing school for a couple of weeks tomorrow, and I don't know how likely it is I'm going to have a sufficiently quiet house to film in over the next couple of weeks while they're at home. I may, and I'll make my best effort to do it, but it's just possible that I'm going to have a little break now. So as I said, I hope you are all well. I'd love to hear what you guys have been reading, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.